Hi, this is 100 in 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Today we are looking at Airranger VR. Airranger VR is a multiplayer battle royale type game that you get to play with a bow and arrow, grappling hooks, explosions, swords, knives, and all sorts of other weapons. It's a lot of fun, and we're excited to review it with you today. Our VR Gear game reviews cover as many aspects of the game as possible so that you can make an informed decision before you try or buy a new VR title. We're excited to jump into Airranger VR with you, so let's get started. First, let's talk about getting up and running. The game is about 4 gigabytes in size, and it will take a reasonable amount of time to download this game on a slower internet connection. If your internet's faster, we're talking less than 10 minutes. Once the download completes, installation is automatic and you're able to jump right in. This game is available on the Viveport Infinity subscription. It's also available in the Steam store and on Oculus for the Rift and the Rift S. It's not, however, available in the PSVR store, so you won't be able to get Airranger there. Because you're going to be playing in an arena against other players, and real-time combat is pretty difficult to succeed at if you're not familiar with the controls, this game walks you through 3 separate tutorials that will help you get familiar with firing weapons, changing your weapons, or using other parts of your inventory. We did all of those, and they were actually really good at getting you up and running and familiar with how gameplay will be. The weirdest part of it was like, they put a person in front of you, and they're like, okay, shoot him.
What?
Well, it's like, practice with your bow and arrow. And I'm like, where? It's not a target, it's just a person. Shoot that guy. I'm like, and you shoot him in like blood. And then it's like, shoot that guy. You're like, okay. And you shoot him, blood. It's like, congratulations, you've learned how to shoot your bow and arrow. So what type of game is Airranger? Well, it's an arena multiplayer battle game, like Battle Royale of different types like Call of Duty or Fortnite, but you're in VR. And you're pulling yourself or jumping or launching across the level as you're fighting other players who are doing the same. This game is played from the first-person perspective. The menu items are navigated from the first-person perspective, and gameplay is played from the first-person perspective. And you're able to control your inventory, your weapons, as well as view people from the first-person perspective all throughout the game. For a theme and story, this game doesn't have a story, but there is a clear theme. It's based in the future, and the weapons are very futuristic, and the type of combat that you're engaged in is also very futuristic. There's a lot of floating platforms or tall skyscrapers, and you feel like you're in a futuristic battle royale setting. This type of theme was a lot of fun because it allowed the game developers to introduce certain weapons that we're not necessarily familiar with that allowed for a creative element in combat. For the controls, at first we thought we could just jump right in and play the game and we could figure the controls out along the way. But the reality is the tutorials show you some key control inputs that will help you switch weapons, reload, pick different arrows. We quickly ran out of arrows and couldn't understand why because we had just picked up new arrows, but the controls to switch what type of arrow you're firing was something that would have been told to us in the tutorial. So we went back and did the tutorial for how to switch weapons, how to switch inventory items, and then gameplay was great. We were able to do the controls, but the controls are very helpful to succeed in gameplay. For music and sound, the music background was very futuristic, electronic type music, and the sound effects were also appropriate. The spatial audio was done very well. You could tell what direction the opponents were coming from. You could also hear your weapon as it exploded or detonated close or far, and you could hear people from a distance approaching you, and you could hear if someone was close by. All of these different audio cues help make the game more enjoyable. The music, of course, was being played in the background underneath all of the different sound effects, and it was the type of music you would expect from a battle royale type setting that adds to the intensity of gameplay. Okay, player movement in this game was really intense. You could walk, you could fire a grappling hook from your bow and arrow to pull yourself across the level. You could fall from buildings, you could jump from your location. There was a lot of different ways to move. The only problem was rotating in the game. You can do a full flip by squeezing one of the grips, and it will turn you 180 degrees in the other direction. But there were no partial turns, or at least it wasn't readily apparent how to do a partial turn instead of a full 180 turn. As a result, it got kind of difficult to move around the level in close quarters. It was easy to move around by shooting your grappling hook, but it was difficult in close quarters. And because the game provides you with weapons like a sword or a knife, close combat is part of gameplay. And if you can't move well during close combat, then the game becomes very difficult to play across all the different scenarios you'll find yourself in. All right, so motion sickness in this game, I'm just gonna say you will get sick if you're not used to VR. You'll also get sick if you are used to VR. There was this threshold where we were trying to get good enough at the game to win a match. So the goal was to up our skills before our motion sickness got too high to continue playing. We got a first place in one match, and that's when we had to call it for playing the game, because it really will make you motion sick. You're being launched to the top of a building and then back down again. You're flipping around and fighting people across the level. You're moving on the ground, and then you'll be jumping or launching yourself again. And so it becomes very disorienting. I like to play in a seated position on a swivel chair so that I can rotate in the real world. But when that doesn't match what happens in the virtual world, or if the virtual world turning doesn't reflect in the real world by your actual turning, you start to get very sick very fast. And one thing I really don't like is not knowing where I am in the physical world at the end of a match. You might have experienced this where you pull off the headset and you say, wow, I'm facing a direction I didn't anticipate. I didn't even realize I had turned. Well, this happens quite a lot in this game, and recentering yourself, something you'll have to figure out on your own. But motion sickness is a real thing in this game. You'll have to have a stomach of steel to not get sick here. So you'll play this game long enough to get good, but probably stop after you start getting sick. At least that's what we did. For environment and immersion, this game was a lot of fun, and you really got into it because you wanted to find where the opponents were. However, it was very difficult once you saw an opponent to know whether or not you could fire a weapon and hit them. There was no way to know how close you were aiming, how well your arrow was shot, and there was no real indication of the sights you were supposed to be using on your bow and arrow to have a successful shot. As a result, it got frustrating when shooting someone from a distance. Also, viewing people that were far away wasn't as easy as you would hope it would be. And because of the player movement in this game, people are moving very fast, flying through the air, and it's not easy to shoot an arrow at a moving target. These things didn't necessarily break immersion, but the environment was actually pretty difficult to succeed in with the type of game that this was. It was fun though to try. We did have a good time winning that one match that we won, but the environment wasn't perfect for a bow and arrow shootout. Okay, so let's talk about the scorecard for Airranger VR, starting with theme and story. We are giving this a middle of the road score of a 5 out of 10. There was no real storyline. The theme was futuristic in nature and you were engaged with it a little bit, but there wasn't anything really compelling about the theme of this game and how it related to gameplay. So a 5 out of 10 for theme and story. For controls, we're giving this game a 7 out of 10. There was a lot of really good control bindings and the input was very well done. The only issue we had, and this gave it some deductions, was how to engage with the player movement mechanism. So turning around, rotating, finding people in close quarters, that was difficult and the controls weren't perfect there. But the rest of the controls were really great for changing weapons, selecting inventory items, or using different weapons. For music and sound, we're giving this game a 6 out of 10. The music wasn't terribly impressive, but it wasn't bad. And the sound effects were good, but they weren't perfect. And there was a lot of the same stuff used repeatedly. We did enjoy the game, and the music and sound helped add to your spatial awareness, but there wasn't anything that really made this music and the sound of this game stand out. For player movement, we're giving this game a 6 out of 10. There was a lot of different movement options. You could get across the level by shooting a grappling hook. You could move on the ground, but we're deducting some points because close quarter combat was nearly impossible because player movement wasn't refined for that. So Rotating was a real problem, and figuring out how to move and fight enemies that were nearby, very difficult. So a 6 out of 10 for player movement. For motion sickness, we are giving this game a low score of 2 out of 10. Now, games like this are very difficult to do in virtual reality, and you're inevitably going to cause motion sickness because you are moving through the air, you're flying, you're launching, you're rotating quickly, and none of these things can be reflected in the real world. And so there isn't a real solution to this today. And so when game developers use this type of movement mechanics in game, it is inevitably going to cause motion sickness. This game chose to use this type of movement mechanics, and so motion sickness is a very big issue while playing this game. It should not be attempted by people new to VR or who are easily motion sick from these types of games. So a 2 out of 10 for motion sickness. And finally, for environment and immersion, we're giving this game a 5 out of 10. It was a good environment and you felt immersed, but there were things that would break the immersion, such as engaging an opponent that was far away or figuring out how to fight them close up. These types of moments in gameplay broke the immersion and added a layer of frustration that you wish just wasn't there. This had a lot to do with the control inputs and player movement that had a negative impact on your immersion in this game. So a 5 out of 10 for environment and immersion. All right, for the overall score for Airranger VR, we're giving this game a 5.2 out of 10. We did have fun playing the game, but it was a race against how fast we could improve before we got motion sick while playing, which isn't necessarily the most enjoyable thing to do, but that's what we did for this game. Not much we can do about getting motion sick while playing a game like this, but it is what it is. If you don't become motion sick easily, this game might be a lot of fun for you to jump in and try. This has been 100 in 100, where we are reviewing 100 VR games in 100 days. Click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you can receive a notification when we release another VR game review tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.